The last thing I saw before the darkness swallowed me whole wasn't the face of a monster from a nightmare. It was the face of my own daughter, Clara, my only child. Her beautiful face, the one I had memorized from the moment she was born, was streaked with tears. And in her hand was a hammer, which she used to pound the final deafening nail into the door that would seal me in the basement and become my tomb for the next 10 years. Hello everyone. My name is Grandma Evelyn. I'm 79 years old, and I live here in this small cottage on one of the San Juan Islands in Washington. The ferries come and go, their horns a low, mournful sound across the water. It's a peaceful place. It took me a long time to find peace again. It took me even longer to learn that peace isn't about forgetting. It's about surviving what you can never forget. What I am about to tell you is a story I have carried like a shard of glass in my soul for what feels like a lifetime. It is a story I buried deeper than any grave, a truth so monstrous I sometimes wondered if I had dreamed it all in the suffocating dark of my prison. But it was real. The ache in these old bones is real. The scars on my heart are real. I have never told the full story to another living person. How do you find the words to say, my daughter, my everything, tried to bury me alive? How do you explain the love that came before such a horror? The two things don't seem like they can exist in the same universe, yet in my life, they did. To speak of it now, it feels like I am standing on the edge of a cliff I have avoided my entire life, and I am choosing, finally, to look down. It is terrifying. But I have to believe that some stories need to be told. They need to be dragged out into the sunlight, no matter how much they scream, so that the darkness loses its power. So, if you would, your presence here with me is a great comfort. Your support for my little channel, Grandmother's Soliloquy, by liking this video or subscribing, it gives this old woman the strength to take that look over the edge. It means more than words can say. Thank you, my dears. Thank you. My story, the real one, didn't start with a hammer and nails. It started with love. It began in a world that was bright and full of promise, in a little house I built with my own two hands alongside the love of my life, my husband, Robert. We bought the land just outside of Portland, Oregon, back in the late 1960s. It was just a patch of dirt and wildflowers, with a view of Mount Hood on a clear day. We were young, impossibly young, and filled with the kind of foolish, beautiful hope that only the young can possess. We didn't have much money, so we decided to build our home ourselves. Robert was a carpenter, a true artist with wood. His hands were strong and calloused, but they could create things of incredible beauty and precision. And I was his apprentice, his partner in all things. I remember those years as a golden haze of happy exhaustion. I learned how to mix cement, how to frame a wall, how to lay shingles on a roof under the hot summer sun. My hands, which had only known typing and housework, became as tough as his. We would work from sunrise to sunset, our bodies aching, our faces caked with sawdust and dirt. But we were the happiest we had ever been. We were building not just a house, but our future, our legacy, a sanctuary made of our own sweat and laughter. The house grew around us, a living thing born of our love. Robert built me a window seat in the living room where I could read, and a kitchen with wide counters because he knew I loved to bake. And the basement was his kingdom. It was a large, dry space with high ceilings for a basement. He ran extra wiring, installed bright overhead lights, and built a long, sturdy workbench that spanned the entire back wall. It was his workshop, a place of creation. It smelled perpetually of fresh-cut pine and sawdust. It was where he built the beautiful cradle for our daughter before she was even born. It was a place of light, of hope, of craftsmanship. It was the furthest thing from a tomb you could ever imagine. The day we finished, we stood on the front lawn, holding hands, and looked at our home. Our home. It was perfect. And a few years later, it became even more perfect when we filled it with the sound of our daughter's laughter. We named her Clara, Darwin Derry. She was a child born of so much love, and she was the light of our lives. She had my eyes and Robert's easy smile. She was bright, and funny, and kind, and she adored her father. She would spend hours in that basement workshop with him, her daddy's little helper, handing him tools and trying to hammer crooked nails into scrap wood. The three of us, in that house we built, we were a perfect, unshakable trinity. The world shattered the first time when Clara was 17. Robert had a heart attack. It was sudden, massive, and utterly unforgiving. One moment he was at his workbench, sanding a piece of maple for a bookshelf he was making me. The next, he was gone. The silence he left behind was a physical presence, a weight that pressed down on the entire house, making it feel hollow and empty. The smell of sawdust faded from the basement. The light seemed to dim. I thought I would die of a broken heart. In those first few months, I barely functioned. The world had lost all its color. But Clara, my Clara, she was my rock, my lifeline. Though she was wrestling with her own profound grief, she became the adult in the house. She made sure I ate. She handled the funeral arrangements. She held me when I sobbed, her thin, strong arms, a fortress around me. "We'll be okay, Mama," she would whisper into my hair, her own voice thick with unshed tears. "We have each other. It's you and me now." And it was. For the next 15 years it was just Clara and me. And they were good years, in their own quiet way. She went off to college, but she never went far. She chose a university in Portland, so she could come home every weekend. We settled into a new kind of life, a new partnership. Our bond, already so strong, deepened into something extraordinary. We weren't just mother and daughter. We were best friends, confidantes, a team of two against the quiet loneliness of the world. We had rituals that became the scaffolding of our lives. Wednesday night was our dinner night, a sacred, unbreakable appointment. She would come over after work. She had become a wonderfully talented graphic designer, and we would cook together, drink a glass of wine, and talk for hours. We would talk about everything and nothing. Her projects at work, my garden, a funny thing we saw at the grocery store, our memories of Robert. The house, which had felt so empty after he died, would fill up with her warmth, her laughter, and it would feel like a home again. She took care of me, and I took care of her. She would insist on mowing the lawn and cleaning the gutters, the Robert jobs that were too much for me now. And I would make sure she was eating properly, packing her leftovers from our Wednesday dinners to take for her lunches, knitting her sweaters for the cold Oregon winters. We were a self-sufficient little unit, a world unto ourselves. I watched her grow into a beautiful, successful, compassionate young woman. And my pride in her was a fierce, burning sun in my heart. I thought to myself, Robert would be so proud. The tragedy of his loss had forged our little family of two into something strong and resilient. I believed our bond was unbreakable. I believed nothing and no one could ever come between us. I was a fool. The beginning of the end came in the form of a man named Marcus. Clara met him at a professional conference. She was 32 years old, and she had dated before, of course, but no one had ever been serious. She was cautious with her heart. But Marcus was different. She called me the night she met him, her voice bubbling with an excitement I hadn't heard in years. "Oh, Mama, he's incredible," she gushed. "He's so smart and funny, and he has the kindest eyes. I feel like I've known him my whole life." When I finally met him a few weeks later, I understood. He was the kind of man who seemed to be sculpted from a novelist's dream. He was handsome in a chiseled, sophisticated way, impeccably dressed, and possessed a charm that was like a physical force. He radiated confidence and success. He was a financial consultant, he told me, who had moved to Portland a year ago from Chicago. He looked me in the eye when he spoke. He brought me a bouquet of my favorite flowers, stargazer lilies, Clara must have told him. He complimented the house, Robert's craftsmanship, my cooking. He listened, truly listened, to my stories about Robert, his face a perfect mask of empathy and admiration. "I can see where Clara gets her wonderful spirit, Evelyn," he said to me that first night, his voice as smooth and warm as aged brandy. "You've raised an extraordinary woman." I was completely and utterly charmed. I saw Clara looking at him, her face illuminated with a kind of adoration I had only ever seen in a mirror when I looked at Robert. My heart swelled with happiness for her. After all the years of being my rock, of putting my needs first, she had finally found someone. Someone who seemed perfect. Someone worthy of her. I thanked God for sending this man into our lives. It felt like the final piece of our family puzzle falling into place. But now, looking back through the lens of what happened, I can see the little things. The tiny, almost invisible red flags I chose to ignore. His charm was almost too perfect. His compliments were a little too polished, his empathy a little too practiced, like lines delivered by a seasoned actor. There was a strange intensity in the way he looked at Clara, a possessiveness that masqueraded as adoration. He would hold her hand, but his thumb would be rubbing it in a way that seemed more like an act of branding than affection. He began, in the most subtle ways, to insert himself into our rituals, and in doing so, to dismantle them. Our Wednesday dinners for two became dinners for three. The easy-flowing conversation I had with Clara became stilted. Marcus would dominate the conversation, telling stories about his successful deals, his travels, his important clients. My daughter, once so vibrant and opinionated, would just sit and listen, gazing at him, her own stories and thoughts receding into the background. He started helping her with her obligations to me. "Oh, sweetie, you look so tired," he would say to Clara. "Don't worry about driving over to your mom's to mow the lawn this weekend. I'll hire a service to take care of it for her, my treat." It seemed so generous, so thoughtful. But what it was doing, slowly and methodically, was cutting the ties of mutual care that bound me and my daughter together. He was making her role in my life, and my role in hers, obsolete. He was isolating her, drawing a new circle around the two of them, with a thick line that left me on the outside. I felt it, a faint, cold chill in the warmth of our home. I felt a sense of being managed, but I told myself I was being selfish. I was a lonely old woman, jealous of her daughter's happiness. Clara was in love. This was what was supposed to happen. I had to let her go, to build her own life. And Marcus was a good man, a successful man who adored her. Who was I to question it? Who was I to see a monster when everyone, including my own daughter, saw a prince? And so, I smiled. I praised him. I told Clara how happy I was for them. I pushed my doubts down, 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 into the dark basement of my own mind, and I locked the door on them. I had no idea that I was only practicing for the real thing. The wedding was a year later. It was a beautiful, elegant affair held at a historic hotel in downtown Portland. Marcus insisted on paying for everything, waving away my offers to contribute with a magnanimous smile. "Evelyn, you've done enough," he said, taking my hand. "You've given me the greatest gift of all. Let me do this." It was another gesture that seemed impossibly generous, yet it served his ultimate purpose, to establish himself as the sole provider, the center of Clara's new universe, making everything that came before, me, her life with me, her bond with her father, seem small and provincial. I watched my daughter walk down the aisle, a vision in white lace, her eyes fixed on Marcus. She was breathtakingly happy, and seeing her happiness, I felt a pang of guilt for the cold knot of dread that had taken up permanent residence in my stomach. I was being a foolish old woman. This was a new beginning. I had to embrace it. I had to silence the tiny, traitorous voice in my head that whispered, "This is all wrong." After they were married, Marcus and Clara bought a large, modern house in a new, upscale development on the other side of the city. It was a beautiful home, I suppose, with soaring ceilings and gleaming hardwood floors. But to me, it felt cold and sterile. It was a house with no history, no soul. It was Marcus's house. He filled it with expensive minimalist furniture and abstract art. There was no room for the warm, comfortable clutter of a real life. There was no room for the past. I remember Clara wanted to hang a framed photograph of her and Robert in the living room. It was a beautiful picture, a candid shot of them laughing in our backyard. Marcus saw her holding it, and he put his arm around her, his smile gentle but his grip firm. "Oh, sweetie," he said, his voice laced with that practiced therapeutic tone. "It's a beautiful photo. But don't you think it's time to look forward, not back? We're building our future here. Dwelling on the past can be a form of grief that holds you back from being truly happy in the present. Let's put this somewhere more private, like our bedroom closet, where you can look at it when you need to. The living room should be for us, for our new life together." It was a masterclass in psychological manipulation. He had taken her grief for her father and twisted it into a pathology, a weakness she needed to overcome. He wasn't just telling her not to hang a picture. He was telling her to erase her father, to erase her history, to erase her histof. And Clara, so desperate for his approval, so conditioned to believe in his superior wisdom, just nodded. "You're right, honey," she said. Yee. I watched her carry the picture of her laughing father into the bedroom, and I felt as if I were watching her carry a piece of her own heart to its burial. My role in their new life became that of a distant, carefully managed relative. Our sacred Wednesday dinners ceased to exist. "Oh, Mama, we're just so swamped," Clara would say over the phone, her voice sounding strained, distant. "Marcus has so many work functions, and we're trying to get the new house in order. We'll have you over soon, I promise." The soons became rarer and rarer. When I did see them, it was always on his terms, at their house, for a formal, stiff dinner where he held court, and I felt like a visiting dignitary who had overstayed her welcome. He began a subtle but relentless campaign to poison Clara's perception of me. He never criticized me directly to my face, of course. He was too clever for that. He did it through 1,000 small, concerned comments to Clara, which she would then, in her confusion, relay to me. It was emotional sabotage by proxy. "I'm a little worried about your mother," he would tell her, his brow furrowed with fake concern. "She seems a bit forgetful." "Did she seem forgetful to you?" He was planting seeds of doubt about my mental state. "She seems so lonely," he would say another time. "That big house must be so empty for her. It's almost a form of self-punishment, her staying there, clinging to the past. It's not healthy." He was recasting my home, the sanctuary Robert and I had built, as a prison of my own making. He was painting me as a sad, pathetic creature who was holding Clara back with my neediness. And it worked. I could hear it in Clara's voice during our increasingly infrequent phone calls. She started treating me with a kind of gentle, frustrating condescension, as if I were a child. "Now, Mama, are you sure you remembered to pay the electric bill? Mama, maybe you should think about selling the house. It's just too much for you to handle." Each question, each suggestion was a little dagger, a betrayal that cut me to the quick. She was no longer my partner, my best friend. She was his mouthpiece. She was looking at me through his eyes, and what she saw was a burden. The inner turmoil was a constant, churning sea of grief and rage. I mourned the loss of my daughter as if she had died. The vibrant, independent woman I had raised was gone, replaced by this anxious, hollowed-out echo who lived only to please her husband. My grief was sharp and visceral, but underneath it was a cold, hard fury directed at him, at this predator who had stolen my child from me right under my nose. How could he do this? How could he so systematically dismantle a person, a bond, a life? And how could I have let it happen? The guilt was a heavy cloak I wore every single day. I had been so charmed by his performance, so desperate for her to be happy, that I had handed her over to the wolf myself. The final phase of his plan began about 3 years into their marriage. He announced to Clara that he wanted to invest in my future. "Your mother needs to be cared for, sweetie," he said, in what Clara reported was a tone of immense love and responsibility. "That house is a money pit, and it's full of painful memories. It's holding her back. We need to get her out of there, for her own good. We should sell it and invest the money for her. We can take care of her. We can take care of her." Clara, completely under his spell, thought this was the most wonderfully loving and generous idea in the world. She approached me with it, her face glowing with a missionary's zeal. "Mama, Marcus and I have been talking, and we have this wonderful idea. We want you to sell the house. We'll handle everything, the sale, the investments. You won't have to worry about anything, ever again. We'll take care of you." I looked at my daughter, this stranger with a familiar face, and my blood ran cold. "Clara," I said, my voice shaking with a mixture of anger and disbelief. "This is my home. The home your father and I built. I am never leaving it." Her face fell. The light went out of her eyes, replaced by a look of deep, pained disappointment. His disappointment reflected through her. "But Mama, it's for your own good. Marcus says—" "I don't care what Marcus says," I snapped, losing my composure for the first time. "This is my life, my home. He has no say in it." Her eyes filled with tears. "I don't know why you have to be so difficult," she said, her voice breaking. "He's only trying to help. He loves you. He loves us." She turned and left before I could say another word, leaving me standing in the middle of my living room, my heart shattered into a million pieces. He had done it. He had finally painted me as the villain of the story, the stubborn, ungrateful old woman who was standing in the way of their happiness, refusing their love. The pressure became relentless. They would call together, their voices a 1-2 punch of loving concern and logical persuasion. Marcus would lay out the financial arguments, the charts and projections, showing how much better my life would be. Clara would follow up with the emotional arguments, her voice pleading. "Please, Mama, do this for me, for us. Don't you want us to be happy?" It was emotional blackmail of the highest order. He was using my daughter's love for me as a weapon against me. I refused. I held my ground. That house was the last piece of Robert I had left. It was the last piece of the real Clara I had left. It was my sanctuary, my fortress, and I would not surrender it. My refusal, my one act of defiance, drove Marcus into a quiet, simmering rage. His mask of charm began to slip. During one phone call, after I had once again flatly refused, he got on the line. "Evelyn," he said, his voice stripped of all its warmth, as cold and sharp as a shard of glass. "You are being incredibly selfish. You are hurting your daughter with your stubbornness. I promise you, one way or another, you will do what is best for this family." It wasn't a suggestion. It was a threat. The weeks that followed were a cold war of silence and emotional manipulation. Clara barely spoke to me. The guilt was immense. Was I being selfish? Was I ruining her marriage? I was so lonely, so confused, so beaten down. I almost gave in. I almost called them and said, "You win. Take the house." But some deep, primal instinct, the spirit of the young woman who had laid shingles on that very roof, held me back. The day it happened, it started with a lie. Clara called me, her voice unnaturally bright, cheerful. "Mama, I'm so sorry for how things have been," she said. "You're right. It's your house, your decision. I want to make it up to you. Can I come over for dinner tonight? Just us, like old times." A foolish, desperate hope bloomed in my chest. Maybe she had seen the light. Maybe my real daughter was coming back to me. "Oh, honey," I said, tears springing to my eyes. Of course, I would love that. She came over that evening. But she wasn't alone. Marcus was with her. My heart sank. "He just wanted to come and apologize too," she said, her eyes not quite meeting mine. They came in. And they didn't just bring an apology. They brought boxes. Dozens of flattened cardboard boxes. "We thought, as a gesture of goodwill, we could help you start packing up some of Robert's old things from the basement," Marcus said, his smile so wide it didn't reach his eyes. "It would be good for you, a symbolic first step in letting go." I was so tired, so emotionally exhausted from the fight. I didn't have the strength to argue. And a part of me, a stupid, hopeful part, thought that maybe this was a compromise, a peace offering. So I agreed. We went down into the basement, my husband's workshop, the place of light and creation. Marcus was a whirlwind of false energy, pointing things out, directing. "Clara, you start on those shelves. Evelyn, why don't you sort through this box of old tools?" He was giving orders in my own home. I felt a sense of profound unease, a deep, primal wrongness. The air in the basement felt heavy, charged. He sent Clara upstairs to get some water for us. The moment her footsteps faded, he turned to me. The mask was completely gone. His face was a terrifying blank slate of cold, hard resolve. "I gave you a chance, Evelyn," he said, his voice a low, conversational murmur that was more frightening than any shout. "I gave you the easy way, you chose the hard way." Before I could process his words, before I could scream, he moved with a speed that was shocking. He shoved me, hard. I was 70 years old and he was a strong man. I stumbled backward, falling over a stack of wood, and landed hard on the concrete floor. The air was knocked out of my lungs, and a sharp, searing pain shot through my left hip. I looked up, gasping for breath, and saw Clara standing at the top of the basement stairs. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with horror. She had seen him push me. "Marcus!" she cried out. "What are you doing?" This was it. This was the moment I was sure she would snap out of it. She would see him for the monster he was. She would run to me. But he just turned and looked at her, his face softening into a mask of tragic, pained love. "Oh, honey," he said, his voice breaking with fake emotion. She fell. I tried to catch her. Oh my God, she fell. He rushed to my side, grabbing my arms, his grip like iron. "Evelyn, are you okay? We have to get you to a hospital." But he wasn't trying to help me up. He was dragging me. He dragged me across the floor to a small dark room at the far end of the basement, a fruit cellar Robert had built years ago. A room with a thick, heavy door. "Clara, baby!" "I think she might have broken her hip," he called up the stairs, his voice a masterpiece of feigned panic. "We can't move her." It could make it worse. "We need to keep her safe and still until the paramedics get here. I'm going to put her in the cellar where she can't move around and hurt herself more. Call 911. And bring me my toolbox from the garage. We need to secure this door so she can't stumble out." It was all happening so fast. The pain in my hip was a white-hot agony. I was trying to scream, to tell her he was lying, but the words wouldn't come out. I was weak, in shock. He threw me into the pitch-black fruit cellar. The last thing I saw before he slammed the heavy wooden door was Clara's face at the top of the stairs, a canvas of confusion, terror, and a dawning, horrifying obedience. She believed him, or she chose to believe him, because the alternative was too monstrous to contemplate. The door shut, plunging me into absolute darkness. I heard him slide the heavy bolt on the outside. Then I heard Clara's footsteps, running, then returning. I heard the click of a toolbox opening. And then, I heard the sound that would echo in my nightmares for the next decade. The sound of a hammer, pounding nail after nail into the door, sealing me in. And through the wood, I could hear my daughter, my only child, sobbing hysterically as she helped him build my tomb. The first few hours, or were they days, were a blur of pain and disbelief. My hip was a universe of throbbing, searing agony. Every tiny movement sent a jolt of white-hot fire through my body. But even that pain was a distant echo compared to the monstrous soul-crushing agony of the betrayal. Clara, my daughter. Her sobs on the other side of that door were the soundtrack to my entombment. Was she a victim too, brainwashed by his monstrous lies? Or was she a willing accomplice? The question was a venomous snake, coiling and striking in the darkness of my mind. The cellar was my world now. It was about 8 feet by 10 feet, with stone walls and a damp, earthy smell. There was no light. Not a crack, not a sliver. The darkness was absolute, a physical presence that pressed in on me, suffocating me. The only sounds were the frantic pounding of my own heart, the rasp of my breath, and the slow, steady drip, drip, drip of water from a leaky pipe in the corner. That drip became my clock, my calendar, my only companion in the void. Time ceased to have meaning. There was only the darkness and the pain. I screamed until my throat was raw, my voice a useless, shredded whisper. I pounded on the door with my fists until my knuckles were bloody and swollen. No one came. I faded in and out of consciousness, my mind a swirling chaos of memories and nightmares. I saw Robert's face, smiling at me from his workbench. I saw Clara as a little girl, handing me a fistful of wilting dandelions. And then I would see Marcus's cold, dead eyes, and Clara's face, streaked with tears as she hammered the nail. I don't know how long I lay there on that cold floor before the door was unbolted. It creaked open, and a blinding slice of light cut through the darkness, so bright it felt like a physical blow. A silhouette stood in the doorway. It was Clara. She didn't look at me. She placed a plastic bottle of water and a plate with a few slices of bread and cheese on the floor, just inside the door. Then she closed it, and the bolt slid home. The darkness returned, but now it was scented with the faint, maddening smell of food. This became the ritual of my survival. Once a day, or what I assumed was a day, the door would open. A plate of meager food and a bottle of water would be placed on the floor. Sometimes it was Clara. Sometimes it was Marcus. They never spoke. They never looked at me. They were my zookeepers, feeding an animal in a cage. My keepers. My torturers. My broken hip healed, but it healed badly, knitting together at a crooked angle that left me with a permanent, agonizing limp. I learned to move in the darkness, my hands outstretched, mapping the geography of my tiny prison. I was a creature of the dark, my other senses sharpening to a painful degree. I could smell the change in the air that meant rain was coming. I could hear the faint rumble of a car on the road outside. I learned the patterns of the house above me. I could hear their footsteps, the murmur of the television, the clink of dishes. I listened to the sounds of the life I was supposed to be living, a ghost in my own home. My mind, in the beginning, was my greatest enemy. The loneliness was a physical entity, a cold, heavy creature that sat on my chest, making it hard to breathe. The despair was an ocean, and I was drowning in it. I thought about giving up. I thought about simply refusing the food, letting myself waste away in the darkness. It would be an end to the pain, to the betrayal. But then, something happened. I was lying on the floor, my mind a maelstrom of self-pity and rage, when a memory surfaced, clear and bright as day. It was Robert. We were on the roof of the unfinished house, and a sudden thunderstorm had rolled in. I was terrified of the lightning. I wanted to scramble down to hide. Robert had put his arm around me. "Don't look at the lightning, Ev," he had said, his voice calm and steady above the roar of the wind. "Look at the horizon. The storm always passes. You just have to hold on and look at the horizon." Lying there in the tomb they had built for me, I realized I had a choice. I could stare at the lightning, the betrayal, the pain, the darkness. Or I could find a horizon. I could not let them win. I would not let that monster Marcus destroy the woman Robert had loved. I would not let him erase me. My survival, my sanity, would be my ultimate act of defiance. This was the turning point. The victim, Evelyn, died on that floor, and a survivor was born. My fight back would not be with fists or screams. It would be with my mind. I had to hold on to who I was. I had to keep my mind sharp, my spirit intact. I created a routine, a fierce, unshakable discipline that became the scaffolding of my existence. I divided my day, marked by the arrival of the food plate, into sections. There was morning, when I would do my exercises. I forced myself to move, to stretch, to walk the perimeter of my small cell, despite the agonizing pain in my hip. I would do dozens of squats, push-ups against the stone wall. I had to keep my body from completely atrophying. I was a soldier in a prison camp, and my body was my only weapon. Then, there was afternoon, which was dedicated to memory and mind work. I would rebuild my house in my mind, room by room, nail by nail. I would walk through my garden, naming every flower, remembering where I had planted each one. I would recite poems I had memorized in high school. I would do complex math problems in my head. I would tell myself the story of my life with Robert, from the first day we met to the last day I saw him alive. I held on to my memories with a ferocious grip, refusing to let the darkness leach them of their color. They were my treasure, my proof, that a life of love and light had existed before this. And there was evening, the time for my secret project. In the first year, my fingers, exploring every inch of my cell, found a loose stone in the wall near the floor. Behind it was a small, hollow space. And in that space, I found a small, rusted nail. It must have been dropped during construction 60 years ago. That nail became my pen, my diary, my hope. Every day, I would spend hours scratching into the soft concrete floor behind a loose pile of rocks in the corner. I started by just marking the days, a simple line for each plate of food. But then I began to write. I wrote my story. I wrote about Robert, about Clara, about the house. I wrote about Marcus, his charm, his cruelty. I wrote about the final, terrible day. I etched the truth of my existence into the floor of my prison. It was a testament. It was a history that could not be erased. I was not just a nameless creature in the dark. I was Evelyn, and I had a story. The act of writing, of giving form to my reality, kept me sane. It was a conversation with myself, with God, with anyone who might one day find this place. Years passed. 5 years. 7. The world outside faded into an abstract concept. The faces of Clara and Marcus, when they appeared at the door, were like masks, their features blurred by the darkness and my own fading memory. My body grew weaker, my hair turned completely white, but my mind, my will, grew harder, more resilient. I was a rock, and the ocean of darkness could not wear me down. Sometimes, I would allow myself to think about Clara. The rage I felt had cooled over the years into a kind of deep, aching sorrow. Who was she now? Was she happy? Did she ever feel a pang of guilt, a flicker of memory of the mother who had loved her? Did she ever stand above my head, in the kitchen, and wonder about the creature she fed in the dark? Or had he successfully erased me from her mind, as well as her life? I had to believe that somewhere, deep inside her, my Clara was still alive, a prisoner in her own life, just as I was a prisoner in the basement. I clung to that belief. It was the only way I could still love her, and I knew that if I stopped loving her, I would truly be lost. Then one day, something changed. I heard new sounds from the world above. The heavy, confident tread of Marcus's footsteps was gone. Instead, I heard Clara's steps, hesitant, shuffling. And I heard another sound. The sound of a child crying. A baby. My breath caught in my chest. A child. A grandchild. My blood. Living in the house above my tomb. The arrival of the child marked a new chapter in my imprisonment. The sounds from above changed. There was the sound of a mother's tired, endless footsteps, the sound of lullabies sung in a cracked, weary voice. And there was the sound of crying. So much crying. Not just the baby's but Clara's. I would lie in the darkness and hear her, late at night, sobbing quietly in the room directly above my head. Her sobs were the sounds of a profound, hopeless misery. And I knew, with the cold certainty of a prisoner who knows every nuance of her environment, that he was gone. Marcus was gone. I didn't know how or why. But his presence, that heavy, oppressive energy, had lifted from the house. There was only Clara and the child. And her sorrow. My routine changed. I began to listen. I became a student of my daughter's grief. I learned the difference between her cries of frustration, her cries of loneliness, and her cries of pure, abject despair. And in listening to her pain, a new feeling began to stir in my heart, alongside the old love and the deep sorrow. It was pity, and a fierce, protective instinct I thought had died a decade ago. My daughter was in pain. My grandchild was in that house of sorrow. And I was trapped beneath the floor, a helpless, useless ghost. The 10th year of my captivity began. 10 years. 3,652 scratches on the floor of my cell. I had accounted for the leap years. I was 79 years old. A decade of darkness had transformed me. I was thin as a rail, my skin a pale, translucent white. My eyes, so accustomed to the dark, ached at the brief, daily slice of light from the door. My world was stone and damp earth, and the geography of my own mind. I had survived, but I was no longer sure what I was surviving for. The sounds from above had settled into a rhythm of quiet desperation. Clara and the child, a little girl from what I could gather, lived a life of quiet, monotonous misery. And then, on the 3653rd day, the sound came. It was different from any sound I had heard in 10 years. It wasn't the creak of floorboards or the drip of the pipe, or Clara's weeping. It was a sharp, authoritative knock. Not on my door, but on the front door of the house, far above. The sound vibrated down through the very bones of the house. A sudden, shocking intrusion from a world I had long forgotten. I heard Clara's footsteps, a quick, nervous shuffle. I heard the front door open. I heard a man's voice, calm and professional. I couldn't make out the words. Then I heard Clara's voice, high-pitched, frantic. No, that's not possible. There must be a mistake. She died. She died years ago. My heart, that old, tired muscle, began to pound a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. What was happening? The voices grew louder, more insistent. Then I heard something that made the blood freeze in my veins. The sound of footsteps, several sets of them, coming toward the basement door. My door. The one at the top of the stairs. I heard a jiggling of the knob. Then a man's voice, clear and close. "Ma'am, we have a court order. We need to inspect the entire premises. Please open this door." "I can't," Clara wailed. "The key is lost. It's just old storage down there." "Then we'll have to force it," the man's voice said, firm, unyielding. There was a moment of silence. And then, a splintering crash. They had broken down the basement door. I scrambled to the far corner of my cell, my mind a whirlwind of terror and a wild, impossible hope. I heard them descending the stairs, their heavy shoes echoing on the wooden steps. I heard a flashlight beam click on, its beam cutting through the dusty air. "Good Lord," one of them said. "What is this place?" They moved around the basement, the beams of their flashlights dancing across Robert's old workbench, across the stacks of forgotten junk. And then, the beam found it. The door to my cell. "What's in here?" the voice asked. "Nothing," Clara shrieked from the top of the stairs. "It's an old fruit cellar. It's been sealed for years." "Sealed with what?" another voice said, his tone sharp with suspicion. "These look like fresh nails." Fresh nails. My mind reeled. Had she been replacing them? Maintaining my prison? The thought was a new, fresh hell. "Stand back," the first voice commanded. There was the sound of a heavy thud, the screech of protesting wood. They were using a crowbar. With each screech, a sliver of impossible light pierced my darkness. My eyes, so long accustomed to the void, burned with an agony that was almost ecstatic. Another thud, another crack of wood, and then the door, my tombstone, was ripped from its frame and crashed to the floor. Light flooded my cell. Blinding, overwhelming, beautiful light. I threw my arm over my face, cowering like a creature of the night caught in the sun. 3 figures, dark silhouettes against the blinding light, stood in the doorway, their faces masks of utter, horrified disbelief. "Oh my God," one of them whispered. "There's someone in here." I slowly, painfully, lowered my arm. I blinked, my vision swimming. I saw uniforms. I saw badges. And behind them at the top of the stairs, I saw her. Clara. Her face was a deathly white, her mouth a perfect O of terror. Our eyes met across the space of 10 years, and a universe of betrayal. And in that moment, she didn't see a monster. She saw her mother. I was rescued. The story, when it came out, was a grotesque fantasy that no one could believe. The men were from Adult Protective Services, accompanied by the police. A neighbor, an elderly man who had lived next door for 30 years, had finally reported his suspicions. He hadn't seen me in a decade. For years, he had accepted Clara's story that I had moved to a retirement community in Arizona and then passed away. But recently, he had heard things. The sound of weeping. The sight of a small, pale child who never played outside. A deep sense of wrongness he could no longer ignore. He had made the call. He had been my Tom, my Dr. Peterson. He had been my horizon. The world I emerged into was alien and overwhelming. The sky was too big. The colors were too bright. The sounds were a cacophony. I was taken to a hospital, a ghost of a woman, malnourished, with atrophied muscles and the bones of a bird. But I was alive. And I could talk. I told them everything. I led them to the corner of my cell, and with the help of the police, we moved the rocks. There, on the concrete floor, was my diary. 10 years of truth, etched in stone. My testimony. Clara was arrested. Marcus, it turned out, had left her 7 years ago. He had bled her dry financially, taking the money from the sale of my house, a sale he had forged my signature on, and had disappeared, leaving her with a mountain of debt and a baby. He had been the one to maintain my prison, to bring the food, until he left. After that, Clara had taken over, trapped in a web of fear, guilt, and a twisted sense of duty. She was terrified of what would happen if the truth came out. So she had kept me in the dark, a secret she fed every day. She was not a monster. She was a victim, broken and brainwashed by a master manipulator. But she had also made a choice. She had chosen to keep me locked away. She was both victim and perpetrator, a truth so complex and tragic, my heart could barely contain it. She was found guilty, but due to the extenuating circumstances of her own abuse, she was sentenced not to prison, but to a long-term psychiatric facility. My granddaughter, my little Lily, named for my favorite flowers, was put into foster care, but I fought for her. It took a year of intensive physical and psychological therapy, a year of proving to the state that I was not a broken old woman, but a survivor. And I won. I was granted custody of my granddaughter. The lesson in all this? It is a hard and bitter one. It is that the people who claim to love you the most can inflict the greatest pain. It is that evil can be charming, handsome, and can speak in the language of love and concern. It can convince you that a prison is a sanctuary, that a lie is a kindness. It can steal your soul one piece at a time until you no longer recognize yourself. But the other lesson, the one I cling to, is that the human spirit is a tough, resilient thing. It can find light in absolute darkness. It can find a horizon in the middle of a storm. It can survive the unimaginable. It can learn to heal. My advice to you, my dears, is to guard your own mind, your own truth, with the ferocity of a dragon guarding its treasure. Do not allow anyone to tell you what you are seeing, what you are feeling, is not real. Trust your intuition. That little voice that whispers, "This is wrong," is the truest, most powerful friend you will ever have. And never, ever believe that you are alone. Even in the deepest darkness, there is always a flicker of light. Sometimes you have to be your own. Lily and I live here now, in this little cottage by the sea. I bought it with the money the state recovered for me from the fraudulent sale of my home. It's a quiet life. She is a beautiful, resilient child, full of laughter and light. She knows that her mommy is sick and getting help. She knows that her grandmother loves her more than all the stars in the sky. Sometimes, at night, I still wake up, and for a terrifying second, I forget where I am. I feel the cold stone walls around me. But then I hear the sound of the sea, that vast, honest sound. I feel the warmth of the quilt on my bed, and I look out the window and see the real stars, not just the ones I kept in my mind. And I know that I am free. Thank you for listening to my story. It has been a heavy burden to carry alone for so long. Sharing it with you, it has made the load a little lighter. Please, if you feel so moved, like this video, and subscribe to the channel. There is strength in community, and every story shared is a light against the darkness. Thank you for being part of mine. Love, Grandma Evelyn. See you in the next story. Endurinium.